environmentalism has become the dominant secular religion of elites, not of most ordinary folks, but for folks that have left behind traditional religions. They've embraced this idea that humankind fell from a state of nature, that we have sinned against the planet, that scientists are a new secular priesthood, and that the end is near unless we repent.
Michael Shellenberger is with us here today. You just heard Douglas Brinkley talk about this. Michael is a journalist who covers crime and drug policy, homelessness, Amazon deforestation, rising climate resilience, growing eco-anxiety, the U.S. government's role in the fracking revolution, climate change in California's fires, and now UFO whistleblowers. He was on my podcast for that. He was on the show previously to discuss his book, Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. So maybe we'll start there, Michael, with just commenting, just a summary of your book and why you think. I think we're starting with the assumption global warming is real and human-caused, but have the alarmists gone too far? The people that throw pea soup on a painting or glue themselves to the wall or something like this, how far is too far?
Sure. Well, great to be here with everybody. Great talk. It was, I think, a good reminder of just how much progress we've made on environmental issues. When you look at things like lead or carbon monoxide or sulfur, we've seen reductions of air pollutants in the United States of between 61 and 99% over the last half century. Carbon emissions have declined 22% between 2005 and 2020. Globally, carbon emissions were flat over the last decade, something that you won't read about in the New York Times. Carbon emissions peaked in Britain, France, most of Europe in the mid-70s, and the main reasons for that is simply the transition from coal to natural gas and also nuclear power. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask in my book, Apocalypse Never, is why are the people who say that they care the most about climate change and the environment most opposed to natural gas and nuclear power if those have been overwhelmingly the reasons that we've reduced carbon emissions? And similarly, why is it that the people who say they care the most about the sixth mass extinction, about the loss of endangered species, the loss of critical habitat for endangered species, why are they the ones who are the most opposed to intensified agriculture, which allows us to grow more food on less land and allow less productive agricultural lands to revert to grasslands and forests? Why would they advocate organic farming, which uses 50 to 100% more land than does conventional agriculture? And so Apocalypse Never, for me, was an exploration of that question. I think the answer is basically money, power, and religion, that environmentalism has become the dominant secular religion of elites, not of red states, not, I think, of most ordinary folks, but for folks that have left behind traditional religions. They've embraced this idea that humankind fell from a state of nature, that we have sinned against the planet, that priests are that scientists are a new secular priesthood, and that the end is near unless we repent and harmonize ourselves. You used to be wanting to get right by God, now people seek to get right by nature. Of course, nature doesn't cooperate because nature isn't a God. And so one of the things we're left with is, are people on the right, are the opponents, the traditional opponents of apocalyptic environmentalism, going to offer a more inspiring alternative that is more hopeful, that's more pro-human, that's pro-civilization, and that's what I think we need to do next.
Yeah. So what is the pathway that the activists, in their minds, think we're going to get when they glue themselves to a wall or throw stuff in a block of an intersection or whatever? What's in their head thinking, by doing this, I'm going to do what?
Well, this is a very interesting question, is are they thinking?
Yes.
I mean, I wrote a lot of pieces last year about, because I started, my kids are grown. Those of you that have had kids, when you see people throwing food against the wall, dumping milk onto the floor, gluing their hands to the floor, what does that remind you of?
2-year-old.
These are temper tantrums. These are literally infantile behaviors. These are the behaviors that one would associate, that psychiatrists would associate with the personality disorder of narcissism. Narcissism is characterized by grandiosity. I'm going to save the world. A sense of entitlement. I should be able to throw tomato soup on a Van Gogh painting. and what's called splitting, which is viewing the world in black and white terms. Everything I do is good. My intentions are pure. I'm not out for power or recognition. I just want to make the world a better place. You, on the other hand, are an evil fossil fuel company or nuclear power executive. So we start to see these traits that characterize narcissism showing up in the advocacy. And narcissism is not a long-term, particularly thoughtful thing. It's really about immediate gratification of people paying attention to you. I think that is really what explains what we've seen, not any kind of rational calculation that this is going to win the public over to the cause of climate alarmism.
What's the calculation on doing all of that, providing enough energy for everybody, 8 billion people, to live like we live in the West without nuclear? Could it be done or not? You really have to have that.
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting is that, it was there's been a study both in Britain and in Germany that you couldn't have had the Industrial Revolution without fossil fuels. They've actually done the physical measurement. You couldn't have used enough wood or windmills or water wheels to be able to have the Industrial Revolution. That remains true. You can't power a global civilization on renewables. Nothing changed fundamentally with the physics of sunlight and wind. To give you a sense of it, when you just draw if you go on Google Maps and you just draw a circle around power plants and you measure how much energy per land use, it requires 300 to 800 times more land to produce the same amount of energy from a solar or wind project as it does from a nuclear power plant, natural gas plant. We don't have enough, there's just not going to be enough land for that purpose, and you run right up into conservation concerns. Now, off the East Coast, the concern is the North Atlantic right whales feed now right around on the East Coast, and so they're being threatened by the expansion of wind development. So no, I think that for me, it became very clear. It was basically, if you care about climate change, if you care about land use, it's all about natural gas and nuclear. There's this long history of studying energy transitions. We move from more energy dilute fuels like sunlight and wind and wood towards more energy dense ones. And I think that's the right trajectory, both from a pro-human standpoint, but also from an environmental one. Yep. I grew up terrified of nuclear power. They broadcast a TV show called The Day After when I was a boy, which showed children dying in a nuclear attack. Chernobyl happened when I was 13, so yeah, these were all fears I had to overcome. The most amazing thing is to go visit a plant, and my favorite is Diablo Canyon in California. And you get there and you hear the barking of seals, and you're like, what is that? And you go down, and that's where the supposedly radioactive water leaves the plant and goes back to the ocean. Well, it's not highly radiated water. It goes back into the ocean. It's fine. It's slightly warmer. The seals and sea lions all hang out at the discharge area because it's slightly warmer water. It's the most pristine tide pools in California because they don't allow buses of school children to stomp around on them and kill the sea anemones and starfish. It's a pristine natural environment. There really hasn't, I mean, there's been a lot of hype by people trying to sell new nuclear. It's the same fundamental technology, which is that you have a solid fuel that goes into the reactors, that then is then cooled in water for 2 to 3 years. It then goes into dry cask storage, and it's just solid metal fuel. So as an environmentalist, what I want is to have a tiny amount of material throughput, that's natural resource, a small amount of waste byproduct. A single Coke can provide me uranium can provide me all the energy I need for my entire life. That is the only waste, long-term waste byproduct. Just sits there at the site of production. Some people think you should bury it. I don't think there's any need to do that. I think it's fine where it is. By contrast, we did a calculation that found that it's several orders of magnitude more solar panel waste, because it turns out you can't compost solar panels. People tend to think that in California, but we have no solution to solar panel waste, so we're concerned about all the wrong things. Nuclear waste is the solution to overall environmental waste because it's a substitute for all of the fossil fuel byproduct and all of the renewables byproduct.
Right. All right, last big topic, free market solutions versus government solutions. So much of the environmental movement is a collective action problem. How do we get everybody to clean up Lake Erie when not everybody wants to do it? So do you have to have government at some point? Can the free market, like Ducks Unlimited, hunters want to preserve the land and so on, could you expand that model to make it actually work?
I gave that example of we reduced our carbon emissions 22% between 2005 and 2020. There was no climate policy that resulted in that. In fact, the Congress had in 2010, the Senate rejected a climate proposal that would have mandated a 17% reduction, 5 percentage points less than the reduction that we had. The reduction that we had, 61% of that was by creating abundant natural gas. And the renewables that contributed to it was just from dumping a lot of money into subsidies for renewables. But we see a very similar path with the way we dealt with the thinning of the ozone layer, which is misdescribed as an ozone hole, is that there was a sort of iterative back and forth between government and industry. There was some regulations, but there was also some sense of wanting the industry to catch up through technological innovation. I did a bunch of reporting on the Dutch farmers, who you may know have been protesting overly onerous government regulations, which are partly, frankly, motivated by a desire for their land to build new housing. But what we discovered is that the Dutch had reduced nitrogen pollution, there's two forms of it, mostly through this kind of back and forth between the government and the farmers. So I think the issue has been overly polarized, with the left saying you need these heavy-handed tactics, the right saying just let the markets do it. It doesn't have to be that way. There can be much more cooperation and collaboration between governments and farmers and industries and technologies, but you have to have some empathy and some understanding of where these guys are at in their technological process. Utopianism is the enemy of environmental progress, and so I think that there has to be some kind of coming together, some appreciation that, yeah, I mean, the rivers were getting cleaner, actually, from 1900 to 1968, when the Cuyahoga famously caught on fire. They'd been catching on fire even worse in the early part of the 20th century. So the progress that's been made, it's often messy. If you look at it, you're like, who's in charge here, and what's the mandate? But I think if you really, especially when you think of it as a bottoms-up process and a kind of back and forth process, a little bit of pressure, but also some understanding of where we're at, that's the right recipe.
That sounds good. Last thought. Some environmentalists, like Greta Thunberg, feel that if we don't scare people to death, they're not going to do anything about it. So we have to say this is doomsday, the apocalypse is coming in 5 years or whatever. On the other hand, people say, but if you tell people that we've made no progress at all, things are worse than ever, then maybe they'll just go, well, then the hell with it. Why bother?
Every environmental trend is going in the right direction. And so the real issue is why are we letting depressed adolescents make other adolescents depressed? It's a power move. They want power. They want attention for themselves. I think sensible people from left to right need to come together and find a more positive way forward.
Sounds good. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank our
Thanks, guys.
speakers. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right. All righty.
All right.
Thank you, my friend.
That was great. That was
Great.
good. All right.
Michael Shermer,
All right.
Douglas Brinkley, Michael Shellenberger. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.